Are we in the afternoon already? Not quite. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this side event. We're gathered here in Bonn, Germany, at the Mid-Year Climate Negotiations, SB 56. For those of you joining us online, thanks so much for your interest. And of course, for those of us here in person, I think you feel in some ways the electricity and the gravitas of the moment. It's been we're still on just kind of getting out of the pandemic, so the privilege of being together and the amount of work that's needed as we head into almost the middle part of this decade, I think all of us are feeling that. So thank you so much for coming to this side event, which is hosted by the Catalyzing Climate Resilience Food Systems Alliance, and you'll hear about that Food System Alliance as we go on today. My name is Coco Warner. I'm a manager here at UNFCCC in the Adaptation Division, and I'll be the moderator for this event. Before I introduce our two panels and how we will proceed today, just a question. Why food systems? 4/5 of the countries in the world import the majority of their foodstuffs. 4 out of 5 countries import food. Today, in an industrialized country, an average household spends 20% of their household income on food. And until recent years, food prices all over the world have been at historic lows. Food prices are now rising. The crunch is on households to pay for food. And in sub-Saharan African countries, the average household spends 40% of their household income on food. Here in Bonn, we're talking about climate change and what climate change means for food security and agricultural systems. And again, I mentioned systems. We are all interconnected. The pandemic has brought that home. We know that a blocked port or a drought in major grain-producing areas can affect people very, very far away. Adaptation is now. People are already feeling at 1.1 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial average. People are already feeling these acute impacts of climate change through food. And I think it's part of the mission of all of the organizations here, all together and through this alliance, to tackle food systems in a systematic way and to go across many of the different important conversations that we're having. So again, thanks very much for being part of this important conversation. If you are a government representative, what we call parties, we invite you to become involved in the alliance. And towards the end of this side event, I'll put up an email address so that you can reach out and get more information, because we really would like to have your engagement. You're right at the forefront, and your leadership is absolutely crucial. Let me now introduce two distinguished panels. And actually, before I do, let me give you an idea of how the event will go today. We'll start with an introduction of what the Catalyzing Climate Resilient Food Systems is. And then we'll go into two different panels. You'll have a first and a second panel. And the fourth part will be to look at meaningful milestones that the Alliance could achieve. So we have a lot to talk about, and now I'll dive right in to introduce our distinguished panelists. Each panelist will take about 3 to 4 minutes to share some of their thoughts, and we're going to do this in as interactive and dialogue-ish way that we can, because there really is so much to talk about. So we'll start with Mr. Zituni Oldada, who's very well known. Right now, Zituni is Deputy Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Your work is known, and we're so glad to have you here today. We're also joined by Miss Loretta Heber-Giraudet, who's the Chief Risk Knowledge Monitoring Capacity Development Branch at UNDRR. You've just literally come back from your global platform in Bali. We heard great things about it. Congratulations. And I'm sure you're going to tell us all of us about the work ahead and what that has to do with food. We're also joined by Dr. Maria Cristina Tirado, who's the president and co-founder of the She Foundation, and also Dr. Alvin Chandra, who's the global coordinator of the adaptation policy and partnerships for UNEP. So that's our first panel. Let me also mention our distinguished panelists for the second panel, just to keep things moving along. It's really our honor to be joined today by Ambassador Ayman Amin, who is with the incoming COP27 presidency. You have so much to do. We're really very glad to have you here in the room with us today, knowing how much you have to do. So wonderful to have you, Ambassador. Also, just a hero and champion of this topic that we're talking about today. We'll be joined by Miss Margaret Atieno Mwebesa, I'm sorry if I, who's Commissioner of Climate Change from the government of Uganda. It's wonderful to have you here. We're also joined by Miss Alicia Iyaga, who's the Director of the Department of Agriculture of the Philippines. And what you are seeing here is that governments care about this topic, and it's a great privilege to have you. Thanks. We'll also be joined by Dr. Takini Nakidakida, who's an agronomist at the Land Resource Planning Ministry of Agriculture from the Republic of Fiji. Great to see you, sir. Thanks for coming. And then we're also joined by the private sector and Ms. Svenja Fritz, who is the head of communications and public affairs from the company called Oatly. And just as a tiny, not that anyone cares, but I dropped by the grocery store this morning and I picked up a liter of Oatly. In my family, we're trying to move a bit more to a plant-based diet. So thank you very much. Great. Let's dive right in then. The objective of this event is to bring together our thoughts, our visions for accelerating the pace towards resilient food systems. There are many challenges in the world. We're all aware of strife, inclement weather, all kinds of stresses. We're still in a pandemic. And we'll have the opportunity to discuss what should be done and how climate-resilient food systems and the Alliance for it can contribute to these efforts. We have a full agenda, and Yulia will help us with timekeeping. I'm probably taking too much time myself, so let us move on. I've walked you already through today's program. It's those 4 segments. After my introduction, we'll go into the second, which is an introduction of the Alliance and what you're trying to achieve. Thank you in advance for that, Zatuni. Then we'll have our 2 panels, and then round up with a discussion with all of you. What are the milestones? What can each of us contribute to this important work on food systems and resilience? So let's start with you. Mr. Zutini Oldada, would you introduce us to the work of the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance?
Sure, with pleasure. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to set the scene about the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance, to talk about its origin and what it aims to achieve, and hopefully that will generate some discussion and some inputs from you. Let me just start by saying, in the introduction you gave, obviously, we all depend on food, but the recent crises and also the ongoing crisis of climate change have shown how vulnerable the agri-food systems are. They're easily disrupted by shocks and crises, and that obviously has an impact on the distribution and how food can reach consumers. So it can be really very serious indeed. And climate change is continuing and is going to make the situation worse. As the IPCC says that the increase of frequency of extreme weather events will impact our economies, but also will impact food security unless we do something about it and fast. So one of the key response to this is how do we make our agri-food systems resilient to the impact of climate change and to these shocks that come and go. So in this slides, I will show you just very shortly to take you through this alliance. And in the first slide, I'll just show you the next one. The origin of this is the UN Food Systems Summit that was held last September. You probably know that at the summit, everyone was called to come up with what we called game-changing solutions and how we can actually improve our food systems so they can nourish everyone, so they can make sure that food is available to everyone in a way that is sustainable and kind to the environment, and also provide healthy diet to people. And the vision of this alliance is exactly to achieve a climate resilient food systems by combining the various efforts from the various alliances and initiatives coming out from the Food Systems Summit. But the main thing about the mission here really is to, as I said earlier, we are not really doing enough to address the food crisis and to fix some of the problems such as the food systems ones. So the aim here is really to join forces to accelerate action and to focus on the most vulnerable communities and people. Because whenever there is a crisis, whenever there is a problem, those that are most affected are those who should not be left behind, who should be really supported the first, because they are the ones who pay the price always. And in the next slide, just to show you that in this alliance there is a core group that involves a wide range of organizations from the UN system and beyond. And the aim is to draw on the comparative advantages of various organizations that have a lot to bring to this agenda. Because food obviously concerns everyone, and everyone has something to bring to this. And by combining this effort through this alliance, hopefully we'll be able to bring in various expertise and technical advice and policy support for this agenda. And in the next slide, just in terms of governance and level of engagement, so there are three main layers really for this governance. So all you need to know is the core group, leadership group, and the main thing is that in this broader stakeholder layer, just everyone is invited to be involved in this, not beyond just the UN system and government, but other organizations working on this and individuals as well, because there's so many challenges to do with fixing the food system that concern people really, and the awareness of how we as people, as consumers, need to also contribute to this, change our attitude, change our way of living and consuming and moving around, and change our mindset as well. And in the next slide, this is particularly to show you where the focus is and examples of some of the solutions that we want to bring into this. Three main pillars here really for actions: focus on mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, looking at risk management through the climate risk reduction and management pillar, and also integration with international policies and plans, because I know there is a lot going on in this space, and it's good to make sure that things are aligned. And I think this is something that we're suffering from really in accelerating our action. We have to stop making things in silos and working in silos, because the world is interconnected, is not isolated, and we have to reflect that in what we do all together. It's only by collaborating and combining our efforts and bringing in our efforts and energies that we can actually go faster and catch up with climate change, which is running away from us. So you can see that it's some of the solutions. I'm talking about synergies and interconnections, for example, connecting water, food, and energy, because they're interlinked, and many countries are facing these combined challenges of dealing with food security, water scarcity, and also access to energy. Energy not just for electricity, but for cooking and for other means of living. And there are examples there. You can see the Secretariat has been running the Resilient Frontier in particular, that has been really successful in raising the profile and awareness about the importance of resilience, because sadly we are not resilient, not just the agri-food systems, but even as people. When you look at all the succession of crises we've seen just recently, the climate change, the COVID, and the conflict, it keeps proving to us that we are not resilient. We can't actually respond to these and adapt. Lately you have seen how even travel now coming back very slowly, but it's very difficult to respond to the growing number of people actually who want to travel. So even the systems we have in place, whenever there is disruption, it takes ages to get them up and running. And the next slide here really just to talk about the work plan going forward. And this is where we need really support from members in particular, from countries and others, in seeing the added value of this alliance and the critical need to build the resilience of agri-food systems. So the focus is on supporting countries, and here there has been a survey that was done to understand countries' need and where to support them. And there are national pathways that have been based from a series of dialogue that took place on food in particular. So there are a number of things being done in place to help support members, but we need really support from countries in driving this forward. Linking to other alliances and processes that exist is also critical, obviously, because as I said, you can't do things in silos. And here I just want to refer, for example, to the Food Systems Coordination Hub that was created after the UN Food Systems Summit. And it is important because the key word there is coordination. It's based in Rome, in FAO. It involves WFP and IFAD, but also other organizations. And the key thing is to coordinate the response and going forward. And the last point here is on advocacy and outreach. Again, it's very important to raise the profile of this issue and really to focus on implementing solutions. Those that exist and others would need to benefit from them, then we need to make sure that takes place. And my last slide is on what's coming up, and some of the events already happened, and it's just to show that the importance of the alliances to link up to other similar initiatives taking place, either the one that happened or the one that are coming. Obviously, the COP27 is a key one, and the focus on food and agriculture. And I'm very pleased that our dear colleague and friend, Ambassador Ayman Amin, who has been really very supportive and vocal for the Coronavirus joint work on agriculture and other initiatives that the presidency is taking forward to help raise the profile of the importance of food and agriculture. Another initiative that will launch at COP26 as well, like the Aim for Climate, Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, and REN Gen 10, and the Marrakesh Partnership under the UNFCCC, which really involves the non-state actors, another very important community to work with under the Marrakesh Partnership, and the land use pathway and ocean pathways and the climate resilient pathways. So I hope this gives you an overview of the Alliance and why is it important, what it's trying to achieve, and I hope this gives a good introduction of where we are, and we would very much welcome your input, your views on how to go forward. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Sutuni. I think with your thoughts, it's clear more than any moment today why a systems approach is so important to all of us, and of course to the organizations and the people that we serve. Thanks, really appreciate that. I'd like to broaden out the discussion and pull in the views of our other panelists. Loretta, maybe we can turn to you first. As we mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, you're fresh back from your global platform. As all of you know, UNDRR is leading global efforts to help countries reduce disaster risks, to identify those risks. And Loretta, of course, you're right on the pulse of risk data. I'm interested in your reflections about what Zituni has presented about this alliance. Why is it important to take a coordinated approach when it comes to food, maybe from your disaster-informed perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's interesting because food systems is very much, I would say, at the heart of what we're talking about when we say risk is systemic, and that therefore to manage and to ensure food systems being made resilient, you really need to take a systems approach. And I think if I could just maybe reflect a little bit on what came out of the Bali, the global platform, which is a gathering which is mandated by the General Assembly every 3 years, hosted by a government, to look at how far we have made progress in implementing the Sendai framework. In this case, it was the Indonesian government that co-hosted it. The issue of food systems and food security was much higher on the agenda than I have ever seen before. And it was in our outcome document, which I believe was the first, and making very much reference to the fact that the war in Ukraine has led to a systemic supply chain disruption and leading to global food insecurity. And quite a few of the panelists were questioning, we see what's happening. We have all of the warning signs out there that we are on the verge of massive food insecurity, if not famine. Why we're not taking action now? Why are we not putting in place the measures that we know are necessary to avert a growing food crisis? So, as I mentioned, food security and food systems are very much at the heart of what we say as risk being systemic and compounding. And for that, we need new ways of managing risk. We need a transformation in the way that we manage risk. Now, we know that climate change is very much leading to an increase in the frequency and intensity of disaster events. Part of the challenge is that this is often at a very local level. And so we don't always have the data that we require to really be able to track the impact of these extreme weather events and the disasters at the local level. And so for us, scaling up disaster loss accounting in the agriculture sector, for example, is something that would be quite critical. The Bali conference led to a 7-point Bali agenda. And going to your question of why is coordination and why is collaboration so important, one of the very first points was that we need a transformation and we need a reconfiguration of risk governance, what we call disaster risk governance. It's certainly not the business alone of disaster management agencies to be able to put in place all of the measures you need to reduce disaster risk. We really need this to be seen as a shared responsibility across sectors. And at the same time, we really need to legislate disaster risk reduction public finance. And so part of what we were calling for was this, if not a revolution, certainly a reconfiguration of responsibility for managing disaster risk, because we see the impacts across all sectors, but in particular the agriculture sector, which incurs 60% of disaster risks. And this requires a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-hazard approach. And yet we don't really have that yet in place. We also see very much a need for scaling up social protection and reducing vulnerability at the household level. And we can build on what's happened during the COVID crisis, in which countries have put in place social protection programs, cash-based assistance programs to help withstand the impact of COVID. We think that these need to be kept in place and expanded. Another point that we would like to emphasize is that there needs to be far greater investment in highly vulnerable and fragile contexts in climate action. There's quite an important disparity among the amount of investment that's going into middle-income countries as opposed to those countries that are already in very fragile contexts. And we think that we need to perhaps work differently in those, in those countries, where we really focus at the community level. And this is where the smallholder food producers are most impacted by climate change. So really bringing interventions down to that community and local level and making the case to invest there is where we think we'll have the greatest results. We have been working very much to promote comprehensive risk management, which is all about collaboration between disaster risk management agencies and also climate actors, which, as we know, live in parallel universes sometimes. But ultimately, we want the same things, which is to reduce the impact of climate and other types of disasters on populations. This comprehensive risk management approach was a key outcome of the global platform. But we feel it very much needs to also be embedded in the agriculture sector. And we have been working with FAO and others to see, can we take what we're doing around comprehensive risk management and really apply it in the agriculture sector? So bringing together the disaster risk management and the climate action, but pulling it together under the sector of agriculture and really scaling up the work there. The other point that came out of the global platform was, when we think of climate change, we often think about the hazards and how the hazards are becoming more unpredictable, how they're becoming more frequent and more intense. But at the same time, we must not lose sight of the fact that vulnerability is increasing. And so we have to tackle poverty and inequality at the same time. Additionally, exposure is also increasing. The decisions that we're making about where we, put our villages, our towns, et cetera, and how populations are moving to urban centers are all having an impact. So we need to tackle these issues together. One more point, because I think I'm running out of time. An important outcome of the global platform, but in fact it started a few weeks before, was increasing universal early warning coverage. This is something that we think needs to include all of the sectors and will have a significant impact on food security, provided that we bring together the actors under this umbrella of increasing early warning, because we have seen that it can be very effective in reducing impacts. I'll leave it there because I think I'm running over, but there were a few other points maybe I can bring up later.
There's so much to talk about. Thank you a lot, Loretta. Of the many wonderful things that you just said, I picked out two, and that is the practices. What do people do, whether they're farmers and herders, networks of Met offices who share the timely information about the weather, which food producers rely upon. It's really, it sounds like to me, focusing on practices that can contribute to our food systems being resilient. And I think that that's really wonderful, because all of us have a role to play in focusing on the practices and helping those networks be in touch with each other and really strengthening those networks, those people who are actually doing the work. And so just hats off also what you were saying about maybe resource mobilization and investment. I think that's very hopeful. We have a lot of challenges, but you're pointing the way to things that are actionable and investable now. Thanks very much. Let's move on and look at some of the additional interlinkages. And Maria Cristina, you have many years of experience working across science and policy and practice. As you've listened to Zitouni present about the Alliance, could you share some of your thoughts about linkages with biodiversity, with climate change, and just this nexus that we always hear about climate, energy, food? And maybe just in a few minutes. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the presentations, which are very inspiring for this alliance. So what I could do is to discuss a little bit some outcomes from the IPCC that are giving us some heads up of how fast we have to hurry up timeframes, emergency or urgency sense of crisis, and just to mention that the work on the nexus assessment on climate change, energy, food, water, health and biodiversity is just starting. And all the outcomes from the IPCC is like a lesson learned that is giving us, what are the gaps, where we have to try to find more information. So basically what we have been assessing, it has been all the, if this triple planetary crisis on climate change, nature and biodiversity, loss and pollution and food waste was causing disruption across the globe, and how, in which regions. So in all the regions, because this was very interesting in this assessment report, that the assessment was looking into political regions and also climatic regions. That was very well done, looking into deserts, looking into the Arctic, looking in tropical areas, mountains, beautiful. I mean, it's like they have some policy briefs that everybody can see in 2 seconds. You will see the main outcomes. So what it was clear is that the world is facing an unavoidable multiple climate hazards over the next 2 decades with global warming of 1.5. However, if even temporarily exceeds a little bit this warming level, this will result in additional severe impacts, some of which will be irreversible. And this is group 2. Group 1 had already pointed out several irreversible tipping points that we cannot go again through that. So the risks for society will increase, including infrastructure, low-lying and coastal settlements, increased heat waves, droughts and floods that are totally exceeding plants and animals' tolerance thresholds and driving mass mortalities in species such as trees and corals and many fishes that we don't know, which is the group that has been more affected since many years, not just by climate change. So these weather events that are occurring simultaneously are causing this, you will read in the report and the summary for policymakers, these cascading impacts that are increasing the possibility to manage or to adapt. And if we go beyond 1.5, adaptation is very complicated, more if we reach 2 degrees centigrade. For example, the IPCC was able to do a case study, and case study include many case studies in the agriculture. And they were looking into the heat and drought combining and how they were causing reductions on crop yields, and how this has been made worse because of the productivity of the agricultural workers because of the heat stress among the workers. So we were combining studies in different chapters that was in health and occupational health. But what we were seeing across chapters as well is that land degradation is one of the most insidious and not very obvious threats to food security and nutrition and sustainable food systems. So once a tipping point is reached, resilience of the ecosystems and the populations can collapse. And these reduced yields are leading to reductions in household incomes, increased food prices locally and potentially globally, and these weather-related streams are clearly creating shocks in global trade. So just to wrap up a little bit, what is another issue that we have to look at is that right now there are 3.6 billion of people living in global hotspots of high vulnerability to climate change, and the extreme weather events that are exposing millions of people to acute food insecurity and water insecurity, and we can discuss later the notion of acute food insecurity, are requiring humanitarian assistance that we don't have, that it does not exist, it's not available. So the more We improve the food crisis rapid alerts like the ICP and all these new rapid alert, rapid response systems, the better. Because when the experience that we have during the, you know that IPCC goes by 7 years, so within these 7 years, we have the ENSO. And that was an amazing global case study that showed us how unprepared we are and how we need to get ready for this. In between 2015 and 2017, 166 million of people in 26 countries require humanitarian assistance due to climate-related food emergencies. So many of these people are trapped between impacts of climate change, conflicts, and economic shocks. So this is, I leave it here, and yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
That's great, thank you. I think, Maria Cristina, listening to you, the urgency is so clear. When we talk about the need to make the transformative change and the need to build adaptive practices, it's so clear. But what I was also hearing you talk about is that many of these specific practices are wholly possible. And of course, we'll learn and change over time. But that, I think it's really helpful to know that many of the, for example, I was reading just the other day that farmers who are practicing soil conservation, regenerative farming techniques, not only are they great for biodiversity, but for the farming family, it really enhances stability of production yields. It enhances profitability and all of those things that for the networks and for the families are so important. Alvin, you've just come back from Stockholm Plus 50, something that UNEP was right at the forefront of. Could you share with us your views about what we here in this room in Bonn at the mid-year climate negotiations, what the next CUP presidency can do to ensure these high priorities of food stability while taking care of the environment that is the basis of everything that we're doing?
Now, thanks, Coco. One of the challenges of speaking, or being the last one to speak on the panel, is that you've had an amazing panel who've talked so much and very good points. So I'm just going to build up on these points. You're right, leaders actually met over last week at Stockholm Plus 50. And what came out of the leadership dialogue was quite important in terms of influencing transformative food systems. So one of the things that came out from the leaders' dialogue was integrated solutions to address climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation. I think this is one of the key messages that not just the Stockholm Plus 50 came up with, but also what IPCC has to say. One of the stark reminders of IPCC Working Group 2 was that autonomous planned management options for agriculture and food systems are not enough for a 1.5 or 2 degrees world. So while we do have smallholder farmers that are practicing conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture, these, they need to be scaled up. They're not at a point where it's needed for that 1.5 or 2 degree world. It's also quite a stark reminder for many UN agencies and development partners as well, in terms of the rapid mobilization in terms of scale of climate finance to solve the crisis of food availability, but also hunger as well. The global food system, it feeds about 7.9 billion people, yet it emits about a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions. That's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to kind of shape the food systems in a way where it actually does benefit the environment. So Stockholm Plus 50 was, there was a lot of discussions around these integrated solutions. When we are talking about integrated solutions, it also looks at transformation of across the food system. So this is now moving from consumer, from producer to consumer to market. What we learn now is that there are huge socioeconomic issues that shape the agriculture and also food production. And I think this is an opportunity for the Alliance as well. While we're looking at best practices, it also is an opportunity to integrate a lot of, let's say, socioeconomic issues. I was in Tajikistan and Philippines at that time, a couple of years ago when I was doing community-based adaptation. And in Mindanao, in Philippines, one of the farmers told me it was in the midst of drought. It's like, Elvin, if you stay here for another 5 days, you'll see what's happening. People go hungry over here. So, I mean, and I've always remembered that. Similarly, in Tajikistan, this is, in Muminabad, southern Tajikistan. You go to this, this village and the southern part where a lot of young people have actually left the farm simply because there's not opportunities for them as they see in the agriculture sector. So for me, this is quite a big opportunity in terms of transforming the agriculture and food systems sector, in terms of creating opportunities for reducing emissions, for increasing adaptation options, but also increasing employment as well. There's a large segment of the sector that employs a large number of people. But it's also, 60% of the people who are employed in the agriculture sector, in fact, live below poverty. So that's a stark reminder in terms of the nexus of socioeconomic issues with climate, but also non-climate issues. When we're talking about, in terms of integrated solutions and transformative food systems, one of the things is that it requires this good understanding of the three paradoxes in play today, particularly with consumers, the farmers, and the market. And we need to take very specific actions to address these three subsectors as well. We're very quickly learning that through UNEP programs that within the food systems and agriculture sector, nature has to play a strong role. At the UN Environment Assembly, member states have endorsed the idea and concept of nature-based solution. One of the things that was talked about at the margins of the UN Environment Assembly earlier this year was a more nature-positive food systems. This is where UNEP comes in, where we look at scaling up ecosystem-based adaptation options and nature-based solutions within sectors like agriculture, in coastal areas, etc. And this is where our niche is in terms of this alliance, having the boots on the ground and supporting grassroots initiative. So I encourage all of you to be part of this alliance. It's also an opportunity to build relationship with strong partners, and particularly partners who are willing to work with you. So thank you.
Really appreciate that. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard some first thoughts from this wonderful panel. Really appreciate that. Give us just one moment. We're going to refresh to our second panel. So think for a moment about what has impressed you, what follow-up conversations you'd like to have, and I would encourage you to build your networks, talk with these panelists, and see how you might get involved in this alliance. So thanks very much, and could I invite our second panel to join us here on the dais? Thank you. And so I'd like to invite, while we're switching, I would like to invite Ambassador Ayman to come to the dais. Miss Margaret Atieno Besa, Miss Alicia Iyaga, Dr. Takini Nakidakida, and also Miss Fenya Fritz. So as you come, welcome. And we'll start in just a moment. Wonderful. We'll start now with our second panel. And for those of you who are joining us online, we're here at a side event on the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance. And I'll turn to really our honored guest, Ambassador Ayman. You have a lot of priorities that you're preparing for this year's COP in Egypt. We've just been spending about an hour talking about resilience in food systems. Any reflections, and also what would you like us here in the room to do to support the incoming COP27 presidency? Ambassador?
Thank you so much for your question. I'm really glad to be here. This is my first time to participate in your Alliance meeting. And I'm really, in Egypt, we are giving a very high priority for agriculture, food security, and food systems. One of the things that, in fact, we are working on, and I heard some of our colleagues here were talking about in the first round of presentations, was the poverty and hunger. I know that this is, of course, a topic that it is hitting most of the developing countries, especially the least developing country parties. It's very difficult when you go to agriculture and food security, and then you are targeting small householders, small house farmers in those countries, and say them, you have to mitigate. Like this guy have only like 1 cow or 2 cows, and a very small place for cultivation, could be half a hectare or something like that. And he's waiting year to year to try to feed his family. So one of the things that we will be trying to achieve in COP27, it will be the increasing of the value chain for farmers. I think this is one of the most important things that most of the countries in the developing world, they are actually addressing. This would be, like I said, one of the priorities in this regard. I don't want just to go here in the organizational theme of COP27 and agriculture, but just get sure that we have like a thematic day where food systems will be addressed in an action plan. I know that the World Leaders Summit on Food Systems, that it was called by His Excellency, the United Nations Secretary General. In fact, they had produced at the end a paper, and there is no such action was taken up till now. So it's our chance in COP27 is to show the world how we can act on this document and how to start implementation. In this regard, we have an initiative that is still under discussions, and we are delighted to discuss it with you here with the UNFCCC, FAO, they are on board as well, other international organizations, and it is mostly going towards implementation. We call the Egyptian COP is an implementation COP. So we would like to see this is happening on the ground. Agriculture and everything I heard from the previous presenters, it's really a challenge. It touches a lot of very sensitive issues in the negotiations itself, starting from loss and damage, talking to transparency, technology matters. So all of these parts, they cannot be solved in one COP all at once. This is a process, and the country-driven process, that it will take us furthermore in time. But after concluding the interpretation of Paris Agreement through the past 6 years, ending in Glasgow 2021, we saw that there is a time now for us to start acting on those sensitive issues. It was in our understanding is to divide agriculture from water, because we have another initiative on water. It's addressing the early warning system as well, and the capacity building in the least developing countries, especially in Africa. We are taking this as a part of addressing the special needs of those countries and putting Africa in our margin of appreciation, of course, since this COP is being held in Egypt. But this doesn't mean by any way that we are neglecting others at all. The call of the UN Secretary General covering the whole world with early warning systems in 5 years, having $1.5 billion, I think as well, this is another important thing that we can work on. Extreme weather events that it's hitting every country. For example, in Egypt, we had lost a lot in our fruits harvesting this year. And when we talk about losses in agriculture, it is not only the substance or the crops that we had lost. It is fertilizers, so it would be managed by mitigation. It is water, which is very scarcity nowadays, and we need to find ways how to reuse water several times. So it's multiple losses when you talk about losses in agriculture. But in this regard in particular, we sought as a presidency to have two initiatives that can serve each other from one side, and from the other side they can focus more on the particular and the important things that touch the small householders. This is, of course, what we were aiming to. I will not gonna jump into any geopolitical situation. You know, of course, what's happening nowadays. The prices are going really very, very high now. It needs to be addressed in a coherent matter. There is some sorts to have a debit swap for agriculture, so debit swap for food. This is a new innovative financial tool for accessing finance in agriculture, need to be discussed, but I think that it will be as well something that can take us one step further in the realm of food insecurity, to try to achieve what we are looking for in the coming few years. So just this is quickly, I know the time is very limited, so thank you so much. It's back to you.
Ambassador, thanks for making time to join us today. We really appreciate your thoughts and also pointing us in the direction that you would like to see our support of your presidency, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Apologies for my voice. I'm quite hit by this allergy in Germany, so this was something new. Thank you so much.
Since about a week, a tree has started blossoming, and a lot of people are struggling with allergies. Thanks. Let's move on and get some country reactions, both to what the ambassador has said as well as to these joint challenges of biodiversity loss, needing stable food systems to make sure everyone has enough nutritious food to eat, and of course climate change. Perhaps I could turn to you, Ms. Margaret Atieno Umbesa. What are the challenges that you're seeing in food systems, and how is that important for your country, Uganda?
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank the UNFCCC, FAO, and all the partners for organizing this very special event. In Uganda, of course, we have a big challenge. Uganda's economy largely depends on nature-based solutions, and one of them, of course, is agriculture. But also, we know that Uganda's economy, over 60%, relies virtually on agriculture. On top of that, Uganda has a very fast-growing population. and currently we are over about 45 million people, and yet our land is still the same. Uganda's land holding is about, size is about 241,559 square kilometers. So what we do on our land should be very, very sustainable so that we don't exploit it to nothing. So for us as a country, agriculture is key to us. One, Uganda has, the agriculture sector is one of those sectors that has now come up with a national adaptation plan among all the sectors in Uganda. And that puts agriculture as a core sector for the country. And also Uganda's agriculture is virtually rain-fed, so that makes it very, very vulnerable. So we have to ensure that what we do within the agriculture sector is quite sustainable, or else our community is going to suffer so much. I can give an example. During 2021, when we had the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we also had floods. The whole country, most parts of the country was flooding, and a great part of our agricultural land was flooded. So we had a huge food shortage in the country. And as I said, we rely virtually on agriculture. So what we are doing in the country is to ensure that we have an integrated, holistic approach to sorting our land issues so that we do not have a silos way of handling the land problem. So a sustainable, integrated land solution is critical, and for us as a country, that is very, very important. And the country recently came up with a programmatic approach to sorting out or implementing actions, including climate actions. Here, whereby all sectors, the relevant sectors, come together to plan together and budget together to ensure that everything we are doing is done in a very holistic manner. We also know that for us as a country, the follow sector, including agriculture, is one of the greatest emitters of carbon. So it is very critical that we really take up these measures and ensure that the agriculture sector is is sustainable, and we are able to contribute effectively to ensure that we really reduce on these emissions. We also have, as I said, the population is increasing, and we have a number of the youth running to urban centers looking for better, more productive livelihoods. So this is also an area which we think, as an alliance, we can work together as a globe to ensure we have these interventions together implemented and planned together. But we also have the issue of early warning. We need to have early warning systems to ensure that our communities, their livelihoods are better prepared. I think for now, that's what I can say.
Thank you so much. A lot of challenges. And also something that you said, Margaret, that caught my attention was integrated approaches and the possible benefits of improving biodiversity, improving soil, livelihoods through this integrated approach. Thanks so much. Let's move on to a perspective from a totally different part of the world, the Philippines. Alicia would love to hear your reflections about food systems and what opportunities this alliance has to help serve countries and regions like the one you're from. Please.
Thank you very much for inviting us to this event. First, let me give you the context of the Philippines. It's really an irony that my country, despite being an agriculture country, is a net importer of food. Even in the 1500s, we have been importing food. And that the most food insecure people, Filipinos, are our farmers and fisher folk. 1 out of 3 are poor. So that's a big challenge for us. And this is compounded further by, of course, the changing climate, which our scientists confirm now that is in our midst. So every year, the Philippines is visited by 20 typhoons. 8 of these are destructive to Philippine agriculture. And we lose about 29 billion pesos. That's about 505 million US dollars every year. That's 1/3 of the budget of the Department of Agriculture already. So imagine if we could reduce these losses and damages, then that would really be a big help to our farmers. So it is really important to transform the Philippine agriculture into a climate-resilient agriculture. And when we say CRA, it really intends to achieve sustainable increased productivity, providing our farmers and fisherfolk with increased incomes amidst the changing climate. So what are the priorities so that we can achieve food security in my country? Number one is we have a banner program, a flagship program on climate change, and we call this AMIA. It sounds like a beautiful girl. But it means Adaptation and Mitigation Initiative in Agriculture. And I'm happy to inform the CRF system, the network, that some of your members helped us in developing planning tools like your investment and prioritization tools, the climate risk vulnerability assessments, which were taught to us by CIAT, now Agrobiodiversity, so part of your CGIAR network. And from the initial 10 climate risk vulnerability assessments that we did with CIAT, we have now expanded this into 55 provinces out of 82. So we're slowly completing all these vulnerability assessments. So what is important with the assessments is it provides us not only information on what are our exposure to hazards are, but more importantly, how sensitive are our crops, priority crops, as rainfall and temperature increases. And finally, what is the adaptive capacity of the municipalities, of the local government units, so that we know where to put the money, the limited resources of government. So our priority now is really to integrate all this knowledge and tools in the local development plans. We just completed our election, and we have new mayors, governors, and we have new national leaders. We have a new president, vice president. So it is important that the development plan of the local government units consider climate change. We now are ready with the tools. We need just to integrate this in the plans. So that is an opportunity which can help us, not only in the area of food security, but in all other issues, including health. The second is, I have been with the negotiations for how many years? And my dream was really to see adaptation working on the ground. And therefore, we pilot tested this AMIA village approach. So this approach shall be our primary strategy in developing climate resilient community of farmers and fisherfolk. It has been pilot tested in 140 sites in the country and proves effective in increasing productivity and incomes. And this approach is really farmer-centric. It looks at the needs the capacities of the farmers. And the government provides integrated and tailor-fitted services that include organizing the farmers into a village of 100 farmers with contiguous farmlands. So we organize them into groups. They should have 100 hectares. And they participate in the identification of climate risk and vulnerabilities. They also participate in testing adaptation actions so they can decide on which adaptation practices they will adopt. To to help them in practicing these CRA tools and technologies, the government provides them with tailor-fitted services like introduction of technologies, access to credit, links to market, and even capacity building in participating in the value chain. Because a very important adaptation strategy under this approach, which we call AMIA, is diversification of farming as well as diversification of sources of income and their active participation in the value chain.
And thanks so much, Alicia. I think this really interesting approach is yet again showing the holistic, making sure that the focus is on the people who are enacting the adaptation, as well as many other things, really focusing on how they're networked and getting that improved livelihood stability and food stability. Thank you so much
Yes.
for those
Can I just
examples.
end with one sentence? That's why I'm here in the negotiations again, because we want predictable, stable, and accessible climate finance so that we can scale up these best practices that we have done over the past years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just clearly just so much experience to exchange. We have, just to preview, we will conclude our conversation in about 16 minutes. And before we do so, we have a perspective from Fiji. And so we're going to go to you, Mr. Takini Nakitakita. And after that, I'd invite questions and comments from the floor, and then we'll conclude around 1 o'clock here in Bonn. Oh, I beg your pardon. I also overlooked Svenja. I'm so sorry about that. We'll bring in the private sector as well, so lots to do. Please.
Thank you very much. So from Africa to Asia, and now we are in the Pacific. Brief context about Pacific small island states. I think we are in the forefront of rising sea levels and very diverse, geographically isolated islands, group of islands. So as small island states, developing states, we are highly vulnerable to the impacts of natural disasters and brought about by climate change. So our agriculture systems in the small island developing states is driven by small-scale producers. I think not more than 10% are large-scale producers. So these small producers are very vulnerable to climate shocks. And for us to make them resilient, in order to have a resilient food system within the group of small island developing states, it's a great challenge because of the many factors interlinked and overarching issues that we face. And we are thankful for alliances as such. The climate food systems, resilient food systems. We're thankful because in small economies, as in the small island developing states, there is a need for assistance or international support in order to make socio-economic systems resilient. Because in the frequencies of disasters that we experience in the past decade, it has really crippled most of the resources that we have. And we have a very diverse agriculture system, rising from highlands right up to small islands which have no soils, which have atolls, means that very limited organic matter. So very diverse agriculture system will require alliances as such for support, and in order to prove, because we are also stewards to a very large oceans. So with oceans being part of the dialogue in the UNFCCC, and we're going on the side, and now with agriculture, we hope that alliances as such, so we invite, when we head back, we'll invite our colleagues in the small island developing states to be members of the alliance of the resilient food systems. And Fiji recognizes the potential of the CRFS Alliance in accelerating the pace towards climate resilience and disaster risk reduction. And we think that the focus of the alliance in addressing these interlinkages between food security and climate change related challenges is a timely perspective. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that perspective a lot from Fiji, as well as for many land-constrained or other constrained food-producing areas. Thanks so much. Now let's turn to the private sector. Ms. Fritz, you have heard we're talking about food systems and also value chains. What kind of role do you imagine a European-based company like yourselves might play in helping contribute to resilient food systems?
Yeah. Thanks for having me and for bringing this important topic to the agenda. I think this is also one of the, and I think this is also the main message we have for the political leaders, to put this topic on the agenda of COP27, because this wasn't the last year, and this should be probably, I think you all agree that this is the main message, actually, from also what I heard from my fellow panelists, how important it is to speak more about the food system. So for those of you who don't know Oatly, Oatly is the world's largest and original oat drink company, and for over 25 years we exclusively focus on developing expertise about oats, and we wanted to drive push a transition, and everything we do, we are guided by sustainability. We want in the way that we want to push the shift in the way people eat, the food is produced, but also how the planet is treated. And this, by really small changes, we all can do by switching from dairy to plant-based. And we do this with different areas. We do have a lot of projects in farming. If we have time, I can go deeper in this later on, but first I want to focus on the political framework, because we of course also use our voice for getting improvements in the political framework, and because we see a lot of barriers, of course speaking from the European view. Although the IPCC is very, very clear here, and we heard all the numbers today, and everybody knows that the food sector is 1/3 of the global gas house emissions are, of course, from the food sector, and half of it from animal stock. So it is very clear that we need this transition, and still we face a lot of barriers regarding political framework, and it starts with subsidies, which make a really broken system to continue, and makes cows' milk very cheap. We also have different VAT rates in the countries. For dairy, it's, for example, in Germany 7%, but for plant-based drinks it's 19%. So it's a lot of barriers which the consumers are not ready to pay when they don't see what the emissions are from from the products. And so we are, of course, all engaging also in transparency and focus on transparency. And we are really engaging in, to do carbon labeling of food products and waiting there for laws so consumers get really or can do a very informed choice, not only what are the ingredients, but also what emissions do the products have, and then can compare. And we're waiting, of course, for laws, but not getting, we also be active ourselves, because we see that the climate crisis has no patience and does not, cannot wait. So as company, and we as a food company, of course, we have a special responsibility, and therefore we want to go ourselves there and initiate an alliance also from companies to develop a standardized CO2e labeling footprint calculation. So at least when a lot of companies in Germany, Switzerland, will follow the standardized scientific-based calculation, we are a step forward, and perhaps politics will then see that it will that it's needed. But also, I mean, it starts really early with nutrition guidelines made by politics. We just now, the public consultation of the EU school program is opened, and we are currently running a campaign there to include also plant-based drinks, because it's very early when children get socialized with nutrition guidelines which are not progressive and are not sustainable and are not looking what it does to our planet. So we don't only demand from politics, but of course we are actively ourselves too, especially such in farming projects. We establish a restoring farming system where we, together with farmers, scientists, and partners, try to support this transition towards having crops for nutrition and for humans and not for feed. Because it's, yes, as we heard, it's really a challenge not only for the land use, water use, emission use, and it's so better for the planet to do it for the nutrition and not for the feed. And perhaps I should stop here to get on time, and but if you have any questions, I'm happy to.
Thank you so much. I think what you've heard are governments expressing both needs as well as some very interesting integrated programs to make sure that there is a path for resilient food systems, both in your countries as well as your regions and globally. Private sector, you alone, Svenja, mentioned a dozen different specific areas where work is going on and work is needed, from behavioral change to political systems considering what activities they want to foster. And now we're at a good problem to have, which is our time is almost spent and there is so much more to say. I think your challenge, Ambassador, is to help point the way so that all of these initiatives and all of these great ideas can align under your leadership as you're pointing us towards implementation, which is what everyone knows is happening and needs to happen in a scaled-up way. One last word from me, and then we'll have just a few minutes from all of you to interact, and that is particularly for the countries in the room, for the parties. Your involvement in this alliance is very welcome and needed. Would invite you to contact the alliance. Julie is here. I can also at the end share the email address, but please do contact the alliance, and we'll provide you more information, and really do want to get you as countries involved. With that, we have a couple of microphones in the room and just a few minutes. So sorry about that, but there's so much to talk about. We'll continue the conversation. Could I take maybe 2 questions from the floor? And then perhaps we have 3. We'll go for 3. And then welcome you to be in touch with these really wonderful panelists, and you, of course, Ambassador. And perhaps what we could do is hear the questions and then use the very last minutes for the panelists, starting with you, Ambassador, to provide your reflections, and then we'll conclude for today. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, I wanted to thank you for this very interesting event. I'm a student in agriculture, and I'm here on behalf of the International Association for Students in Agriculture and Related Sciences, and I wanted to know, how are you planning on reaching the farmers in order to fill the knowledge gaps that might and do exist on sustainable farming, and how you then plan on then implementing these changes, how to get the farmers then to move away from the current conventional farming practices through this new gained knowledge, and how to change towards these sustainable farming systems. And also, if you have a message to the new generation of farmers that I am here to represent. Thank you.
Great, let's move on to the second question.
No? Yeah, it's working. Lovely. Thank you very much to the panel for that interesting discussion. I'm from the Humane Society International, and I had a question regarding livestock production, which was touched upon in the panel, which was great to see. We know from the IPCC report, the latest one that came out, that we do need a shift towards more plant-based diets, among other sort of policy on food systems. And my question, I've got two really, is we still see a gap between the science-led recommendations like those of the IPCC and actual kind of policy action in these conferences. So my two questions is, one, I'd love to hear the panel's views on what the challenges are for policymakers to put those science-led targets into place, and then also how we as civil society and your alliance can support you in making that happen.
Thanks for those two questions. And we have one last question, at least from the floor, and again, encourage everyone to stay in touch and continue networking, please.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Andrea. I represent an NGO that supports indigenous peoples in Brazil. I live in Mato Grosso, a state which has the largest amount of grains for exportation in Brazil. And my question is regarding which comments do you have about the engagement of the agribusiness sector in reducing its impact over peasants and indigenous food systems that are the initiatives that need to be protected and have its resilience enhanced in a warming world?
Thanks very much. And I'll turn to our panel. And do feel free to, of course, address these three of probably 100 questions that all of you have in your minds. And then at the end, we will conclude, and wishing all of you lots of success for your important work here at SB 56 in Bonn. Ambassador?
Well, I cannot address the three questions, definitely. But for the part of integrating the work of the youth and the what we are having in the COP itself, agriculture, I would say it's a lucky topic now because it came up on the SB's agenda in 2011. And still the road is quite long. I hope that we can conclude a way or a roadmap in COP27 to see what we will do with agriculture and the whole workshops that we had since 2013 up to this SB 56. This is on the formal track, but on the 1.5 track that I'm telling you about, the initiatives when you bring official people into completely relaxed mood to work on initiative for implementation, this is completely something different. So we are not aiming to bring the 192 countries, the members of the UNFCCC, but maybe we are aiming to bring a number of countries who are really encouraged to do implementation on the ground. Once you unlock the box of finance and technology transfer, definitely you will start to move from normal way of farming or traditional farming into new technological farming. For example, in Egypt, there's a lot now of studies is how to cultivate rice by dropping. This is a completely something new because, you know quite well, we have here people from Asia. Rice is always, they get its own way for cultivation. Maybe this is why we are quite keen for water and at the same time something that address our food security and to keep the level of aimed proteins at its current levels. So this is a trade-off between the real investing in agriculture and in the same time the new methods that can come on the implementation front. Everything here is connected to each other. Once you see implementation on the ground, I think the whole negotiations here would be formally unlocked because you see something that can deliver finally. This is what I can share with you. Thank you.
Wonderful, and one can see just I could even feel the momentum and the urgency in your comments. Thank you. Zitouni, I have the sense that some of the questions you might be able to answer about the Alliance. Could I give you the mic really quickly?
Sure, yeah, thank you. And I'll answer the question from the students as well on the involvement of farmers and messages to young farmers. For the Alliance in particular, I mean, we did reach out to smallholder farmer organizations to be represented. You'd be welcome also to advise us on who should be involved in this. For the overall FAO's work, you know, we have farming schools, we have programs related to climate smart agriculture, where we reach out directly to farmers and representatives of farmers and farming community for the knowledge, for the knowledge transfer and also information to farmers. We're just developing a new strategy on climate change where we're also having different pillars of where we want to engage with the world outside there. And one of them is engaging really at the farm level with farmers is absolutely critical. Now, my message, particularly to young farmers, is to be proactive, to be involved in this agenda, and not to wait just for the invitation or to be involved, because the landscape is so busy, there is so much going on. But you heard from Ambassador Ayman as well what's being planned for the COP and beyond. So there are opportunities for young farmers to be involved, and we would like them to. And just to finish on that, for the transformation we're talking about, we need young farmers and young entrepreneurs, because innovation is going to be key to achieving this transformation, including digital agriculture. That's the future. That's how we see farming being moved on. When I say innovation, is in the broader sense, is not only for hard technology. And that responds to the question from the colleague from Brazil as well. We really respect the local knowledge, the knowledge of indigenous people who innovate all the time to adapt to climate change. So that's what we mean by innovation. It's not only hard technology, it's really in the broader sense. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I will just, a quick timekeeping. Everyone's time is so precious and you have so much work to do, and yet there's so much to talk about. Alvin, I see you have the mic, so I'll invite your comment. And then following that, not knowing if the room is booked, I just invite those of you who can, perhaps just to move to just outside the room to continue your conversations, and we will certainly have many times in the very near future to continue. Sincere thanks to all of the panelists. Good luck, and Alvin, you have the last word.
Thanks, Coco. I just wanted to compliment what my colleague from FAO has said and respond to the question in terms of opportunities that countries are developing their national adaptation plans and updating their NDCs. UNDP, UNEP have been supporting countries develop their NAPs. We are supporting as many as 20 national adaptation plans, and within this, agriculture features at least in the top 2 sector priorities. That is an opportunity. The challenge we see is that within this sectoral analysis, the linking of downscale climate data and particularly communicating risk to agriculture and food sector has been quite challenging. But we have within the Alliance partners have different tools, methods, and this could be readily deployed. Thanks.
Just 1 second. Coco, if you don't mind, I would like to respond to the question of the diets to the IPCC, because we have done that study 2 times already. So I don't know who was asking, but basically we have been in 2 assessment reports. It has been assessed the co-benefits to health, right? So in the last assessment report, we had some results that were looking into global assessments and transitioning to more plant-based diets in line with WHO recommendations, or what your doctor will recommend you, or what Susan Mercado is recommending in Philippines, could reduce mortality by 6 to 10% and reduce food-related greenhouse emissions from 30 to 70% by 2050. So there are limitations on affordability and trade-offs, but I will be very happy to discuss this later on. Thank you.
Wonderful. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Hi everyone, we have a session on protein diversifications and food systems starting in 10 minutes. So if you're working on food systems, we're starting a session on protein diversification in 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Benja. Benja was good. It was super interesting. I mean, if you like, we can have maybe a bilateral call, because that's something that we're definitely looking into in terms of building private sector partnerships and having them as our champions, and at the same time, you know, seeing how we can contribute to your work as well. So for sure, yeah. For us too. Yeah, and it seems like you're doing really tangible stuff, so we'd be very... But thank you very much. No, thank you. Thanks. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna go. Thank you so much, Rosie.